Okay, we are in the season finale of Star Trek Lower Decks, Season 4, Episode 10, Old Friends, New Planets. Now, this season, I have been complaining a lot about how Lower Decks has been reliant on jokes that are references to old Star Trek things. And it's usually throwaway lines where it's very obviously written as a joke, but you don't get the joke unless you know the reference. And it feels like Mike McMahan had gone back in time to hear this criticism and fix, because obviously all of these episodes were written and produced before I started reviewing the first one. But this episode, while it does have a lot of Star Trek references, both thematically and also literally, they bring back a character from a 5th season episode of TNG. Actually, they bring back a couple of characters, one of whom, they got Sito Jaxa, who she was in 2 episodes of The Next Generation, and I'm pretty sure the actress hasn't acted since. She moved on, she did other things. She was willing to come back to voice her character again for this episode in a flashback. We also got, it's a flashback to the events that preceded The First Duty, the episode of TNG where Wesley and his fellow Nova Squadron flight crew members are under investigation by the Academy for a flight accident that killed one of their members. And so because this is the events preceding it, Wesley Crusher's in this episode in the flashback, voiced by Wil Wheaton, who's, you can tell, trying really hard to sound like a young Wil Wheaton. And it's not too hard because Wil Wheaton still is just a big kid. If you've ever watched him host the Ready Room, which is the after show for new Star Trek stuff, which hasn't been running for a while, I'm pretty sure, just because of the strike. But you can tell the dude just has this teenage enthusiasm about him. It's just, he's just gotten old in his looks, but he still has that youthful exuberance about him. So you can tell that he's trying to sound younger because his voice has a little bit more gravel to it now that he's in his late 40s, early 50s. But yeah, it was cute. Transgirl Jade says, I love Wil Wheaton. Yeah, he's a good dude. I like him. I will say that I went to BlizzCon several years ago and Wil Wheaton was there to host the costume contest. And he opened that with a 5-minute set about how bad he was at playing Diablo 3. For 5 minutes, literally the only joke that he kept telling over and over and over again was how bad he was at playing Diablo 3. And 2 minutes into it, I was like, okay, so he doesn't have another joke. This is just what he's going to be telling for the rest of it. So I left. I went to another hall, except that they were piping in his audio to the entire convention center. So I couldn't get away from how bad he was at Diablo 3. Quinn says, doesn't Wil Wheaton voice someone in Overwatch? I don't know. If he does, I haven't heard about it. I like Wil Wheaton. I really appreciate him as a person, but he has some shortcomings. I don't think he should be doing comedy, is what I'm saying. Quinn says he doesn't mind that. All right, no worries. Anyway, back to the episode. I was just talking about those little things. But thematically, so this episode takes a lot of direct thematic elements from The Wrath of Khan. It even uses musical cues from The Wrath of Khan. There's a whole cat and mouse game moving through a nebula, which was the big battle scene in The Wrath of Khan. And literally a similar ending to The Wrath of Khan. There's literally a Genesis device in this episode. But this episode brings back Nick Locarno, who I had mentioned in last week's review, actually. Yeah, here we go. And as you can see, Memory Alpha, the way that it does characters is it has, here you've got Nick Locarno as the animated one, even though this is Nick Locarno. This was him in The First Duty. The way that Memory Alpha does pictures is, I think it shows the most recent picture of the character, and then it shows the first appearance of the character, which this can be a problem sometimes because if I pull up Christopher Pike, chronologically, this was the latest appearance of Christopher Pike, which is him in a wheelchair, and then I guess it does now show him. Okay. Before that, it actually used to show the actor who played Christopher Pike. Showed Jeffrey Hunter, the guy who played Christopher Pike in the original pilot for Star Trek. So you had a character who we have primarily seen in Strange New Worlds, but neither of the pictures that they were using was of Anson Mount, who is the primary actor playing him. So it's a little weird how they do that stuff. It's an aside, kind of a minor complaint that I've got. But yeah, anyway, this is Nick Locarno, and if you see his face here, you will be like, wait, that's Tom Paris from Star Trek Voyager. Like I said last week, yes, that's basically who it was supposed to be. Tom Paris, as they created the character for Voyager, was basically Nick Locarno, except they changed his name so that they wouldn't have to pay royalties for every episode to the writer of The First Duty. But this episode decides, no, let's actually take Nick Locarno as his own person, and let's find out how he would have ended up. And I think it was a very smart and incisive place to take his character, somebody who in The First Duty was so high on his own supply, so convinced that he did nothing wrong, and was so good at manipulating other people to take the fall for things that he did and to take responsibility for things that he did. And he has not learned since then. That is basically his ultimate failing in this episode. But the ship that has been appearing all season, that has been ostensibly blowing up ships but actually just kidnapping the crews, that was his ship. So he has been the villain behind the scenes all season as he builds his new Nova fleet, which is basically he's been contacting the junior officers on a bunch of ships to orchestrate mutinies so that they can all like steal their ships and form an unaligned fleet that everyone else will have to take seriously because he's got a Genesis device. So it's the nuclear deterrent, right? The Genesis device is so powerful. Like obviously a nuke in space is like, we're in space. We've got more powerful weapons than nukes already. But a Genesis device, which can destroy an entire planet and rebuild it, that's real power. But the episode is kind of like one of those things where he sees himself as a revolutionary who has preached this whole thing about how he's, giving power to the little guy and you never have to answer to anyone else again. But he's still trying to, be in control of your life, and when people start rejecting him, he's like, no, I'm in charge here, and all that stuff. I really liked how they took his character here. You could have decided, I want to redeem him, but they didn't go that route, and I think I was okay. There's also like the fact that that he looks like Tom Paris, because same actor, Robert Duncan McNeil, like they literally address it in the show. Like he does a quadrant wide broadcast announcing Nova Fleet, and Rutherford is like, hey, he looks like Tom Paris, and Boimler's like, I don't see it. And the rest of the episode, a lot of it is callbacks to previous events in the season. A lot of little jokes, like the whole thing where Boimler and Rutherford were able to resolve a roommate dispute by both playing Mark Twain on the holodeck to each other. They bring that gag back for a little bit. They go back to the Orions because Tendy's an Orion, and her sister is now like the leader of their crime syndicate family, and they have to negotiate with them on stuff, and a lot of just little things that have been building throughout the season. This was a nice culmination of all of that, and I kind of like that. One of my problems with Star Trek since the Kurtzman era is that every show has been a season-long arc, and you don't really get aside from Strange New Worlds, you really don't get that episodic television stuff. Everything is contributing toward the season-long story arc. And one thing I really like about Star Trek, like the older Star Trek, is like you could literally just take an episode list, randomize, pick one, and just watch that, and you get a complete story from start to finish. And I think Lower Decks this season did a really good job of having episodic storytelling that all ends up culminating in an episode that draws on all of the seemingly unconnected episodes that we had this season. I think that's probably a good way to do it. I think Strange New Worlds, being another episodic show, is also good with that, but I really like episodic storytelling for Star Trek. I'm not opposed to longer form storytelling. Deep Space Nine did a great job with that, but I also like Star Trek where you can just sit down and watch a complete episode and get a complete story. And I think this one did a pretty good job on this one. Now, there is one thing that I've noticed that every season of Lower Decks does, and that it doesn't necessarily always end on a cliffhanger per se, but it often does end in a change to the status quo for at least one of the characters. Like at the end of season 1, Boimler ended up leaving the Cerritos and joining the crew of the Titan, but then they brought him back to the Cerritos by the beginning of season 2. Or Mariner leaves Starfleet because she's been kicked out, but then by the end of the season, she's back in Starfleet. And in this episode, Tendi leaves the ship at the end. And I know she's going to be back on the Cerritos by like episode 2 of season 5. But I challenge Mike McMahon to not do that. I challenge him to actually upset the status quo in a real meaningful and lasting way. They've already started to do a bit of that, because this season they all get promoted to Lieutenant Junior Grade. So they're not sleeping in the hallway anymore. They have their own quarters. They have more responsibility for commanding other crew. And that has also meant that Mariner has had to have a character arc, because she has fought having any kind of command her entire career. And we really find out why this season. And so I appreciate, even though like I really like episodic storytelling, like those little character moments that we see from episode to episode and how those can go to upset the status quo. I really like to see more of that. And I would really like Lower Decks to stop doing this whole thing where they change the status quo at the end of the season, only to then just go back and everything's back to normal. It's all okay by the beginning of the next season. If Mike McMahon wants to upset things by having Tendi leave the ship, I don't want them to bring her back to the ship until like the end of season 5. I would like to see what she's doing going off as part of the Orion Syndicate. No, I want to see that story, and I don't want that to just be a one episode thing and then she comes back and now she's, a lieutenant on the Cerritos again. But I think this is a great episode, and this is kind of a wrap for Star Trek this year. We've got season 5 of Discovery and season 2 of Prodigy coming out next year. But with the actor strike going on, they haven't been able to film season 3 of Strange New Worlds yet, so we're probably not getting that until 2025. And likewise, because we've had the writers and actor strikes, Starfleet Academy has not been able to start filming yet. And the Section 31 movie with Michelle Yeoh, that they haven't been able to start production on that either. So there's a lot of Star Trek that we're just not going to get until probably 2025. So aside from the last season of Discovery and more seasons of Lower Decks and Prodigy, it kind of feels like we're tapering off our Star Trek content for a while. So it's kind of bittersweet. This was a really good way to leave it off for this year. But I am kind of sad that I'm not getting new Star Trek until next year. And what I'm getting next year is not going to be as big as, like, say, last year, when we literally had, like, 40 weeks in a row of new Star Trek. Hey, thanks for watching. I'm trying to get my channel monetized, so your view means a lot. Don't forget to toss me a like, and subscribe, and ring the bell. I stream Mondays and Fridays at 5 p.m. and Sundays at 2 p.m., so catch me live and join in on the convo. You can find all my socials in the description below, and thank you to all my patrons, with a very special shout out to my Whale Shark tier patron Ryan D, and my Anemone Friends tier patron Piftle Cakes. Your support means the world. Catch you next time.